what the British euphemistically referred to as a cost of living crisis, the like of which we've never seen. I mean,
Yeah.
it's off the scale, and the Democrats are going to pay, one hopes and presumes, a political price come the November midterms. But the
Yeah.
problem is the political class is united behind these policies, and there
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be anybody prepared at the moment to put the brake down.
Yeah, well, in terms of the economy is concerned, well, the markets are in a slow motion crash
Yeah.
across the board. They've erased all gains for the year. They are negative territory for the year. Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies that were supposed to be the salvation, that's where you can store value and whatnot. They're all crashing. Bitcoin is, I think it's at $28,000. And the pegged currency, cryptocurrencies are also falling. It's a whole, it's a bloodbath. And so there does not seem to be any kind of safe haven for what's coming. The only safe haven is real estate and properties. That, of course, companies like BlackRock and Bill Gates over the last few years have invested heavily in farmland and residential properties. And those are the only things, real property, real assets are the only ones that are going to come out relatively intact. Any kind of paper asset, bonds, you're going to get shellacked. And insofar as a precious metal certificate of deposits, if I were you, I would. If anybody's into that, you better be very careful, because any kind of certificate is only as good as the institution issuing it. And so if that institution goes belly up, that's it. Your certificate is worthless. You're going to be in line with all the other creditors. So there is no safe haven other than real estate, precious metal is where it's at. And the one country in the world that has estimated total assets, commodity assets of $75 trillion is Russia, the largest owner of commodities on the earth. And of course, they are going to be sitting pretty, but everybody else is going to take a beating like never before. Now, insofar as the American economy is going and the way things are going in the United States, well, these morons, again, I'm sorry, but that's the only word to describe these people. A couple of days ago, the Biden administration and their sclerotic and idiotic group said that they wanted $33 billion for Ukraine. And the warmonger said, no, let's make it an even 40. And they passed the even 40 billion. People don't seem to realize $40 billion is an extraordinary amount of money. Do you know that the yearly budget for the Russian military is $56 billion? Okay. I mean, we have to measure the size of this package. And of course, it's going to go to the arms manufacturing companies and to Ukrainian oligarchs. That's where the money's going. Where in the United States don't have baby formula, and they're giving all this money to Ukraine and the oligarchs there. I mean, like, what clown world? It's clown world.
It absolutely is. I mean, I have to say, this is the other thing that I find that absolutely takes my breath away about all of this is that this is a $40 billion on top of almost $14 billion, which has already been spent. I mean, it's all gone. I mean, $14 billion in what, 6 weeks? I mean, where did it all go? What did it achieve? I mean, where is all this money that all these great
javelins.
Weapons, the javelins, which apparently were not working, the switchblades, which aren't working. I mean, it's just incredible to see how this thing is. The more money is spent, the less seems to be actually produced from it. But I mean,
Alexander, something? What I'm thinking, and I'm not saying this ironically, I'm saying it for real. But what if they had taken all that money and said, "Hey, Vladimir, if we give you $56 billion, will you pull back?" He probably would have taken the deal.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, as I said, it is clown world. as you absolutely rightly say. And unfortunately, what was that expression? Spend $1 billion here, spend $1 billion there. Now you're talking real money. I mean, this is only the start of this. I mean, Jacob Dreisen has said that he expects fully, before this whole thing goes through the Senate and all of this, that 40 billion will probably grow to 70 billion. That's 60 to 70 billion. That's his guesstimate. And then, of course, that will probably last a few months or weeks. And then we'll have another one.
You know what I think this situation is, and I'm being very serious here. Okay, I mean, no joke. All joking aside, and what I'm going to say might sound like a joke. It's not. It's very serious. Have you noticed people who are gamblers, who are afflicted with the malady of incontinent gambling? I myself don't have any kind of problem, but I've seen it in others, and it's a tragedy. Where these individuals,
a member of my family had it. I know all about it.
Yes, it's horrible. Okay. I personally, thank God, nobody in my immediate family or even close family or friends had this, but I've seen it in other situations, acquaintances, or people who knew people. Anyway, the point is that, these gamblers, they start spending their money, and all of a sudden they lose and lose and lose. And all of a sudden they're like, screw it. We've already lost so much. Let's just bet the ranch. It's sort of like when they realize that there's no solution, so you just might as well just sign the IOU for $1 million or $10 million. It doesn't matter anymore, because you've already lost. In your bones that you've lost, and so it's just almost going through the motions. You see what I'm saying?
I think you're entirely right. It is an addiction, and I think that you're absolute. I think you've got it, actually.
No, but it's more than that. It's throwing in the towel. It's knowing that there's no solution, so we might as well just throw the kitchen sink at this, and in the hopes that something, somehow, some magic will happen. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think you're absolutely right. It's you put more and more chips on the one number as the roulette wheel spins, and then as you lose all your chips, you then pile on an even bigger mountain on them, until, of course, you're left with absolutely nothing. By the way, the best writer on this is Dostoevsky, and he wrote a wonderful short story called The Gambler, and there's a brilliant opera by Prokofiev, by the way, on this very which took that story and showed it. And it is an absolute addiction. I think it's I don't think that is a metaphor, what you described, Gonzalo. I think that is an analysis of the actual situation. These people are gambling. They gambled with the sanctions that they piled on in February. They've gambled with the $14 billion of military aid they sent before, and now they're gambling even more. And they're going to go on gambling until they've sold absolutely everything out. And now I want to because I think we really need to touch on the military situation.
Yeah, but I just want to say one thing, guys. I agree with the gambling thing, but I also think that all of these guys, these politicians, the oligarchs, the puppeteers behind all of them, they're making a killing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they are making a lot of money. And if I go off of what they did to Greece in 2010, I think they're going to take all of this money and they're going to buy up everything, all the apartments, all the land, all the flats in Europe, everything. And we are seeing You're Going to Own Nothing and Be Happy, part 2 after the coup. Now we're seeing the second act, and that's what they're going to do to Europe. This is not what they're going to do to Eurasia or to Asia or to the countries that are out of the system, Latin America. But as far as Europe goes, I think, personally speaking, for Greece, I think they're going to come to Greece and they're going to finish the job that they started in 2010, and they're going to buy every single bit of property, including full islands. Don't be surprised if Jake Sullivan doesn't own some island in Greece in 5 years. You know what I mean? That's what I think we're gonna see happen. They're gonna own it all. Because I saw what the Greeks went through, and they had to, Greeks used to have their home. They had their grandparents' home.
Yeah.
Maybe their parents had a home. In 2010, they had to sell, their home in the village or their dacha because they just couldn't survive anymore.
Yeah.
We're seeing the second act play out from the coup. And they're going to take all that money and they're going to buy everything up. Exactly what you said, Gonzalo. Who's going to buy the real estate and the commodities in Europe? The people that are approving this $40 billion deal right now.
And coming to that, actually, because it follows directly from what you've just said, Alex, because, again, I have connections in the real estate industry here in Britain. I mean, at the moment, prices right across the entire real estate world are surging. I mean, because as Gonzalo correctly said, in a time of high inflation, where do people put their money? What retains value? They put it in land, in property. But eventually, the price rises beyond the reach of most people. And at that point, you start to get contractions. The housing market contracts, let me finish, at middle and lower levels. But of course, if you're talking about islands, and if you're talking about the very high end, there is absolutely no upper limit there. I mean, I could say that. I mean, I know all about that. I've seen it. I've seen how it works. At the moment, as it happens, Alex, just for your information, there is an island in Greece which is for sale for €7.5 million. It's got a lot of things you need to do, but, it's on sale. I mean, I happen to know. Don't ask me how I happen to know, but I do know. 20 million euros, there'd be buyers.
Yeah.
If prices rise that in that kind of way.
Yeah, but here's the thing. See, I personally, of course, was a child, a small child, when it happened in Chile, that we had hyperinflation during the last year of the Allende regime in 1973. And what happens when inflation goes extremely high before it hits hyperinflationary realm? When things go really high in value, all of a sudden asset prices start to collapse. Because what happens is that people start to need cash in order to buy necessities. And that's what happened in Greece in 2010. That so many people all of a sudden found themselves that they didn't have any money, and so they wound up selling precious assets, their homes or their cars or whatever, because they needed the cash on hand to buy food to survive. And so what happens in a hyperinflation or a very high inflationary environment is something to be aware of, because what you're saying, that the prices of properties right now are skyrocketing, and they're actually outpacing inflation by quite a bit, probably because people are parking their money into real estate, real assets. But what will happen is that when high inflation becomes normalized, when you have 20 to 30% annualized inflation and your food bill is far outpacing your earning ability, people will they'll start to sell their toys. I'm telling this for the audience so that you guys in the audience, in the chat, will understand what will happen. People start selling their toys, like their jet skis, their motorcycles, the third car that they have, the Jeep that they have for the weekend and stuff like that. They're not going to sell their daily driver. They'll sell the extra that they have, whatever that extra is, and they'll sell it at a fairly steep discount. Right now, you're seeing that a lot of used cars are being sold at a premium because there are no new cars. But once you get into a hyperinflationary environment of 20, 30%, those prices are going to fall radically because there's going to be a lot of offer. And they're going to be like the nice cars, like the G-Wagon and stuff like that. They're going to start to sell at a big discount, at like a 30% discount. And as that gets flushed through the economy, more expensive and important assets will start to go on the market at even steeper discounts. And I can tell you a specific example that happened to an uncle of mine, the man who married my mother's sister. That when he was an architecture student in 1973, he had a little Fiat, a little MG that was just, a POS, a student car, right? And he was offered an apartment for this car, an apartment. Because what happened was that the family that owned the apartment knew that they could turn around the car and sell it and get ready cash to leave the country. But they couldn't find any buyer for their apartment. And it was a nice luxury apartment. And my uncle, and I know the story because my uncle to this day keeps on telling the story that I kept the stupid car. I should have given it for the apartment. It's one of those things that, the deal of a lifetime that slipped through his fingers, because he was a kid. He was 22. What did he know, right? But the point, and it's very important for you to understand, chat, that when high inflation gets to that level, 20, 30, 40% annualized, people will start to drop every asset they have to get cash to buy food. That's the thing. And that's the horrible situation that will happen. And you think that this can't happen, that the American economy, the European economy, that this is impossible. Anything can happen. I mean, honestly, can you remember back to October of 19 and how far we've come in 2.5 years?
I think that's an extremely good point. By the way, you're absolutely right about the effect of inflation. I mean, there's been ample academic studies about this. Both of you are right. The effect of inflation, the eventual effect of high inflation, is that it centralizes and concentrates wealth. I mean, the wealth becomes ever more concentrated as assets eventually slip into fewer and fewer hands. Now, as I said, there's enormous academic literature on this, of which I have only touched the surface myself. But, that is an iron rule of an inflationary crisis. It happened, by the way, in Germany in the 1920s, that one of the effects of the inflation in Germany was that German industries especially became much more concentrated than they'd been previously. And of course, if we're talking about Russia in the 90s, well, that's another story again. So that is the iron rule of an inflation crisis, that, as I said, assets begin to become concentrated in an ever-shrinking number of hands. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And I'm afraid the second thing I wanted to say, and this absolutely follows up from what Gonzalo just said, which is that it can happen anywhere. Nowhere is immune to an inflation crisis. I mean, it can happen in Britain, it can happen in America. The fact that it's not happened before doesn't mean that it can't happen. Now, what prevents it happening are two things. Firstly, the very fact that it hasn't happened before means that provides some kind of break, because people are accustomed to operating in a certain way. They have a confidence in the currency, maybe a misplaced confidence in the currency, but they believe that because the USD is worth something today, it will continue to be worth the same or something similar tomorrow. And that is an important factor, and we must never discount it. But ultimately, what makes the difference is sound economic management. Now, if economic management is unsound, if it is pursuing irrational objectives, which is what we're seeing at the moment in Europe and to a certain extent in the United States, then an inflation crisis becomes all too real, all too possible. And we are at the early stages of this one. Now, maybe things can be done. I mean, there's still time to turn things around. And maybe there will be a pushback eventually. And, I'm beginning to sense, especially in Germany, that there is the first stirrings of protest against this rush. But the trouble is, the quality of our political class everywhere in the West is abysmally bad. And they're intoxicated with their own power and their own belief. And of course, they don't have any, as I've said many times, they don't have any internal brakes or reverse gears. I mean, if Ursula von der Leyen were listening to the experts, she wouldn't be pressing on with this oil embargo idea. It's clear nobody really wants it except her and her group. And, people like Habeck and Baerbock and people like that. But nonetheless, because nobody's prepared to say no to these people, I suspect that sooner or later she will get him.
I actually, I'm not sure that she will. There's a weird arrogance to them that that prevents them from seeing. Once they have made up their minds about something, it's a weird stubbornness, the stubbornness of truly stupid people. That they think that they're absolutely right, and so they will never deviate from their course of action, no matter how incredibly destructive, no matter how obviously destructive it is. They believe that they are the owners of the truth, and they're going to go to the end. And so and also the other issue that you point out, which is the thing that deeply troubles me and depresses me. You see, if we get rid of all of the leaders that we currently have on both sides of the Atlantic, the next crop up, they're going to be equally stupid, equally pig-headed, and they're not going to make the wise decisions. The wise decisions for the audience, if you want to know what it is, it's very simple. It's, first of all, tell Zelensky to negotiate a surrender. Because every day that passes, you are losing a battalion of men needlessly. You are losing 500 to 700 men per day in Ukraine in a war that cannot be won. It is simple as that. It cannot be won. There's no denying it or debating it. And finally, the Western media, Western commentators are starting to slowly admit the truth, which is that the Russians are winning. Slowly, inch by inch, they're grinding away because these people don't have any understanding of what a war of attrition really is. And the Russians, of course, are past masters at it. It's just this slow, patient grinding, eking out, a kilometer or two a day of advance. And of course, in the West, accompanied, used to rather dramatic wins and victories and big sweeping movements. They don't understand this notion of, a kilometer or two a day, but, over 10 days, 20 days, it adds up. And so that's the Russian mode of war, and it's very effective, and they're winning. They should reach a ceasefire agreement and a peace agreement, and they should roll back these sanctions and try to go back to a status quo ante, because this is only going to hurt the Europeans. There is no solution where the Europeans, quote unquote, win. I mean, Alexander, do you see anything where you could say, oh, the Europeans won, the Americans won in this conflict, in this situation?
I can't see any way that Europe comes out well from this. I really can't. And you're absolutely right. The right thing to do, the correct thing to do if you care for Ukraine is that you tell Ukraine, you tell Zelensky, negotiate, find a compromise. But of course, we're not doing that. We're doing the opposite. I mean, I want to just say something here about negotiations, because I feel here particularly ashamed and angry with my own government, the British government. Because as we know, Zelensky's people, his negotiators, went to Istanbul and they came up with this proposal, and it was pretty half-cocked. There were lots of stupid things in it and all kinds of contradictions. But it did seem to start to move towards a realistic settlement of the war. I mean, Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. There'd be restrictions on Russian, on foreign troops on Ukrainian territory. Security guarantees would not cover Crimea and Donbass, probably paving the way for Ukraine to recognize the loss of Crimea and Donbass. And what happened? Boris Johnson and the British government contacted Zelensky. They said, we don't like what you've conceded. If you make these concessions, we are not going to give you security guarantees, the kind of security guarantees that you're seeking, and which are essential for you to pacify your hardliners in Kiev. We're absolutely not going to do that. They've got to encompass all of Ukraine, including Crimea and Donbass. In other words, you've got to retain your insistence that these territories are Ukrainian. And of course, if we're giving you security guarantees for Crimea and Donbass, that means in effect that we're prepared to help you recover those. And we're going to give you piles and piles of weapons so that you can go on and win the war. And what happened was, under that kind of pressure and with those sorts of promises and bribes, and of course, this is just the British, but the British played a leading role here, but the Americans as well, Zelensky did a 180-degree U-turn And the result is that the war, the negotiations, which could have started after Istanbul and headed towards some kind of a solution, are now completely stopped. And as you rightly say, Ukraine is caught in a war of attrition, which it is losing disastrously. And can I just say, Gonzalo, I mean, you published this tweet that I saw a couple of days ago. I'm sure it was you. I mean, in which you said that, there was this day, which was an absolutely disastrous day for Ukraine. There was the fiasco in Snake Island, which I'll come to in a moment. There was this loss of Popasnaya, which, the Western media doesn't like to talk about. There's the encirclement of the troops in Severodonetsk. Yep. All this is very bad. But every day we get these reports of hundreds of men dying on the field of battle. And they're looking older, they're looking more ragged, they're becoming more tired. We see protests now, scattered small protests across Ukraine, but they will start to grow. And Ukraine is bleeding, and it's bleeding to death because of the arrogance and stupidity of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace, the Biden administration, Ursula von der Leyen, and all the others. So we've got a crisis, an economic crisis, an economic war of attrition, which is destroying the European economy, and an actual war of attrition, which is destroying Ukraine. I just want to mention Snake Island, because we all know what happened on Snake Island. But this morning, or I think it was last night actually, the British Ministry of Defence published its own account. And Snake Island was a great Ukrainian victory, in case you didn't know. What actually happened was that the Russians were going to try to resupply their garrison on Snake Island, and they were intending to transform Snake Island into some sort of fortress, and there were going to be cruise missiles there, and there was going to be all sorts of huge anti-aircraft missile systems there, and the Russians are having problems resupplying Snake Island, and these Bayraktar drones are knocking out the supply ships. This is days after the actual battle. That's the story the British are being told about what actually happened on Snake Island.
Alex?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
Alex?
Yeah, no, you cut out for a second. Yeah, they're not talking. Yeah, they're rephrasing. Alex, I think that there's feedback on your end. There we go. Thank you, Alex. Alexander, the delusion over Snake Island is extraordinary. It's all over the place, all over social media. All kinds of nonsense is being pushed. Yeah. And what the disaster, of course, is that the whole Snake Island thing, from what I'm understanding, and this is not confirmed. I mean, none of this stuff is really confirmed, but there's enough evidence that it needs to be the case, that this nonsensical operation was pushed by the Boris Johnson government. Yeah. And it was Zelensky himself who gave the order to do this. Yeah. And there are rumors that a U.S. Marine commander and a British officer were lost in this particular escapade. And the whole point of it was to score a PR victory for May 9th, to spoil Victory Day. And what happened was, it didn't spoil Victory Day, it led to the death of 60 men for nothing. Because on top of that, Snake Island it's of trivial importance. It's an island in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea where it was. When I finally Googled it, I'm like, this place? It's in the middle of nowhere, okay? It's not in front of Odessa or anything. I mean, technically, yes, but it's 120 kilometers away. It's of no use. And they threw away 60 men, trained men, hard fighters, men that you cannot replace overnight. And I mean, you can't replace anybody, period. No. But in terms of an army, these experienced fighters were killed for no purpose whatsoever. It's just a tragedy. I mean, I just, they are so obsessed with PR, with how things look, as opposed to reality. That's the thing that I find so unconscionable about this entire situation insofar as the war and how it is being conducted by the Zelensky regime and their minders in 10 Downing and the White House. All of these people are so obsessed with image, with the headline, with the narrative, with how things look, rather than the reality of the situation. It seems like they cannot confront reality. They can only live in some sort of weird fantasy land of narrative, of, who can blow the biggest bubble of bullshit. That's all they seem to understand. It's an insanity. It's a sickness of the mind and of the soul, as far as I'm concerned. An unwillingness to look at reality.
Well, it's also a function, I have to say this, of our educational systems and the spread of postmodernism and the belief in narratives as being the dominant form of discourse, and of the belief that narratives can actually shape outcomes, which to some extent, of course, they can do, but only to some extent. I mean, facts have a way of, in the end, of breaking through, but they don't understand wars of attrition, and they don't understand either that, as we have discussed so often on these programs, all three of us, in a war of attrition, which is the kind of war, as you rightly say, that the Russians like to fight. Now, I'm not somebody who knows much about war and has been very interested in war, but I've been rereading, or at least reading, books about previous wars that the Russians have fought. And it is very much the Russian style, actually, to fight wars of attrition. I mean, they did that. That's how they defeated Napoleon, ultimately, for example. That's how they defeated the Germans in the Second World War. It is ultimately attrition that they do. That's what they are good at. Anyway, in a war of attrition, it's not whether you own this inch of ground or that inch of ground, whether you're advancing a kilometer here or a kilometer there. The purpose always is to destroy your enemy, to destroy your enemy's army. I mean, Kutuzov gave up Moscow, but he destroyed Napoleon's army, and that brought the Russians all the way to Paris. So, I mean, this is what the Russians do. Now, what we're seeing in Ukraine is a particular form of this, because, of course, the Russians know what they're about, but we don't. I mean, we create stories about this Battle of Snake Island, which, I mean, I hadn't tell you the whole story about this. I mean, there were other suggestions that the Russians were going to install S-400 missiles on Snake Island. I mean,
it's not
quite apart from, quite apart from anything else. I mean, the size of the place, it's tiny. I mean, you can't realistically install vast numbers of missiles there. I mean, how do you reload the launchers? I mean, you can't. I mean, it can't be done. I mean, this is a complete nonsense.
Yeah, you make it a big fat target. If it's that tiny, it's easy to just turn the whole thing into a fire zone, and that's that.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous. And you see, the thing I'm very concerned about at this stage, and I'll just throw it out there. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence that Ukrainian commanders are fleeing the field. Ukrainian officers are leaving their men. And there are so many anecdotes that, that old saying that, enough anecdotes and you're talking about data, And there seems to be accumulating data, let's call it that, from the Russian POWs, the Ukrainian POWs, who are reporting to their Russian captors that their officers fled. And that's why they surrendered, because they didn't know what to do, because they didn't have the leadership. They were willing to continue to fight even. But if their officer isn't there, who do they shoot? Where do they go? They didn't know. So they gave up. And like you said before, a lot of these men are showing their age. They're not young men. They are older men, which means that the pool of available soldiers is rapidly diminishing for the Ukrainian armed force. But quite apart from that, you have to keep in mind that, and I'm speaking to chat so that you all know, deserting, an officer deserting his post during war is a capital offense. If you're caught, you are court-martialed on the spot and often executed on the spot. It's the worst dereliction of duty that you can possibly carry out. And I am not saying this to cast aspersions on the officer class of the Ukrainian armed force. But what I am saying is that when officers get to that level of desperation, that they think that it is actually smarter for them to desert, run away, go to their families, and try to escape with their families. Well, it signals that those officers no longer believe that any sort of victory can be achieved. They're basically signaling that the war is lost.
Yes.
And the more such incidents, the worse it gets, because the word gets around. The only thing that talks more than teenage girls are soldiers on the battlefield, because they've got nothing better to do. And so, they are going to talk, and because of communications technology, it's easy for them to communicate with their families, with other men in other units and whatnot, and tell them, hey, my lieutenant, my captain, my whatever disappeared.